I'm going to start doing some of the prep work on this console. This edge got damaged quite a bit, a lot of scratches and dents. It's not really a stain. What that coating is? It's some type of a solid stain because it doesn't penetrate the wood. It just lays on top. I think the effect was to make it look like ebony. So it'll be a fairly easy color to match, and which is what I did. I have some ebony, timber-made ebony that I'll use to start with, but it needs to be lightened up, so I'll use a red oxide pigment to lighten it up some. And I'll just mix, and I'll keep mixing and adding until I get the color I want. And then start laying it in there. Timber-made works really well. I like it. And once I get enough in there, I'll take the Bondo spreader and level it out as much as I can. You still want to leave it a little heavy because it does shrink a bit. So I want to try to minimize how many times you have to do this. There were some areas that had to be re-glued. They were coming apart. So while that filler is drying, I'm working on some other parts. This wasn't a very big section, but I had to have a long clamp to get to it. Then you can kind of see the line right there where that screwdriver's going in. I'm going to spread it open a little bit so I can get plenty of glue in it. And run the glue down each side of it and get as much glue into that joint as I can, and then clamp it up. It's still pretty early in the day, so after I get all this clamped up, I've got a bunch of errands I'm going to run and let all this stuff dry. So hopefully this afternoon I can get back to it and do a little sanding and a little more prep work. It's fairly cool today, so none of this stuff is going to dry very fast. I'm going to work that glue in with the edge of this little piece of chipboard. Make sure I have plenty of it in there. I clamped it up from the sides like this, and then it wasn't lined up in the other direction very well, so I got this clamp in there and I started looking at it, and I didn't like the way it was lined up, so I added another clamp. That's where I'm looking at it here. Yeah, it doesn't look good, so I get another clamp and pull it in straight so that it's flush. Well, it's back after running my errands, and some of that filler is dry enough to sand. I'm using 320. If I'm just scuffing something up and getting it ready for another finish or whatever it's going to be, I generally use the 320. I have a random orbit sander, but I'm not going to use it on most of this. It's a little bit too radical. Most of this is going to have to be handwork. So I'm going to be careful with it. Doesn't need much anyway. It's just this one edge that I'm working on here, and the very bottom are the problem areas. So the stain that I modified is I'm putting that on now. I'm getting this one section done. Then I'll probably elevate the whole thing up so I can work on the bottom without having to work on my knees. Start getting get up in the years a bit, and you start having back issues. And a guy told me one time, he said, when you get to be our age, Anytime you get ready to get down on the ground, you better have a plan on how you're going to get back up. And he wasn't kidding. So like I said, this stuff is almost a total blocker. There's no real wood grain that shows through. Ebony is kind of like that anyway. And so I'm pretty much done out here for the day. I'm going to roll this in and close up the garage. I got some of the other parts on the inside that I'll be working on next. Get them ready to work on. It's pretty cold in the morning. It's too cold to work outside. Well, for me and for most of the, finishing products, you don't want to be working out there when it's 42 degrees. The stuff just doesn't work well. So some of these smaller parts I can do inside my living room. As you can see, my living room is basically just an extension of my workshop. My workshop's tiny. It's not even half the size of my living room. But as you can see, I make a mess just about everywhere I go. I don't have Martha Stewart living with me and making sure that I'm tidy. I don't have to worry about that. It's pretty much a bachelor pad. This is actually the grill, and it is in fairly good shape. There's a good sized scratch there that I'll have to do something about. But there's not a heck of a lot I can do with this grill because of that logo. I know I can't strip it down or I lose the logo, and that's real important to keep. So the most I can do is clean it real good, try to fill in some of the scratches and as best I can, hit it with some steel wool, and then start adding lacquer until I can do a little more rubbing out, make it look good. There's also some really interesting inlay that you can see in there. It looks like a maple or something, but it's almost a flamed or a curly maple. And I would like to be able to make it pop a little bit better, but I'm not sure how I would do it if I can't really strip this thing. I'm working on this gouge that's in the grill, or the front panel, and trying several different methods, trying to hide it as best I can. The gouge is across the grain, so it's really difficult to make it go away. And I'm dropping in some lacquer here, and you can see that it just shows up more. It's too dark, so I kept messing with it for a few hours until what finally seemed to work was a fill stick, which was really close in color, and it doesn't soak up lacquer and darken. So that's what I ended up doing. I got the console up on a table so I wouldn't have to work on my knees. And what I did was I stripped down all the veneer with some 150 using the random orbital, and being very careful, of course, because it's so easy to go through. The older veneers were thicker, though, so it wasn't as dangerous, but still I wanted to be very careful. It's a mess if you go through that veneer. So then here I'm just doing some hand sanding to try to make the edges all come out nice and clean and straight. Remove any cross scratches across that grain, because those will show up immediately when you put lacquer on there. I won't be using any stain. This will be just pure straight nitrocellulose lacquer, which I get from Mohawk. I use their classic instrument lacquer. I'm used to using it because of all the guitars that I've built. Now, all of those were finished with that lacquer. It's designed for heavy build, and it's designed for buffing out to a mirror finish, which I don't think I'm going to do that on this one. That's a very time-consuming process. First, you get your multiple coats on. With the guitar, you usually have 8 to 12 coats. And then you start with your level sanding. Start with an 800 grit, and you go to 1,000 and 1,200 and 1,500 if you want. And then after that, you go through your buffing. And The problem with this is that there's too much small detail. It's almost impossible to get into that detail and get it as a mirror finish as the flat areas, so it doesn't look right. So my process will be probably 4 or 5 coats, and generally light sanding between coats, although that's not necessary with lacquer. And then I'm going to wait probably 2 weeks. Lacquer squirms for a long time. And then I'm going to wait till it completely settles down, and then I will do a really good level sanding on it. And then I'll do one last coat, probably with some flow out control on it, and thin down a little bit to get it to lay down nice and flat. After I went over it with 320, what I usually do is wipe it down with water. That does a couple things. First, it gives you an idea of what the finish will look like unstained, which I really like. Second thing it does is it exposes any scratches, which gives you another chance to take out. It also raises the grain, and that gives you another chance of taking that grain out, at least the raised grain, and so that it doesn't happen when you actually apply the first coat of lacquer. What I'm doing here is grain filling. This looks like the wrong color filler, but it's not. The deep grain in this mahogany veneer is really dark, and so I had to do a bunch of testing, but I would mix some up, put it on there, and then would let it dry, and then hit it with some lacquer to see how the colors matched up, and they matched up really well with the existing dark grain that was in the lacquer, or in the veneer, which I like, so I wanted to keep it. Here I'm just using the Bondo spreader to push it down into the grain. Is pretty hard. I'm pushing it down in there to make sure it gets all the way to the bottom of the grain. And this is really grainy, porous veneer. And then after I get it spread on there, you don't want to put too much on at a time because it starts to dry pretty quick. Then I have another scraper. It's a plastic scraper that I fixed up to be nice and flat and sharp, and then I try to trim it off flush with the surface to minimize sanding. Probably have to do this a couple times. This stuff shrinks, but it's easy to work with. It's water-based, and even if it dries up in the cup that I'm using, all I just do is add a little bit of water, and it just turns right back into a nice smooth paste like this. This is several hours later, and the stuff is dry, so I'm going to start sanding it off, and you want to take all of it off except what's in the grain, and using the block to get up tight to the edges. I want to get this part of the console sealed really well with lacquer before I put the solid stain on the other areas. You see the taped off areas. Those are going to be black stain. And if I tried to put that on without sealing that mahogany veneer, it would soak right in and I'd never get it out. So I have to get this done first before I can put that on there. This is tedious. Eventually what I did is I went to my random orbital, and I had a piece of 320 in there that was really dull. And that's what I used to get the excess grain filler off of there, because I'm so afraid of going through that veneer. There's some areas where I know it's really thin, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you go through it, you just have a mess on your hands. You can't get this stuff anymore. I've been to a couple of places to see if I can get some of it, because I have a chip in another part that I want to try to fix. But this is really old. This is stuff that they were able to get back in 1936. The stuff they get now, it's different, and it's very reddish compared to this. This is another part that's almost done. It's the little door that goes on the side. You can see the really dark grain that's in there. So I don't show it when I'm spraying because that little garage just fills up with fumes, and the lacquer just gets on everything. I don't want to get it on my camera. But this is as far as I'm going to go with this episode. I'm going to go ahead and post this, and then the last one will show everything being put together. Thanks for watching.